quizzing is just an outlet for how I process or receive that said information. That outlet, if it were not present, if I didn't quiz, I'm actually hard to put at as to what would lead me to that fix again. I don't think there's a replacement for it yet, because as is typical, most people, like, that outlet for them tends to be something like blogging or writing or coming up with videos, for example, just like this one. I don't think I have an absolute replacement for what quizzing is, which is a big problem, because at times where I don't have the time and the energy to invest into quizzing because it requires a certain degree of time and investment, I'm not sure of what to do, because I tend to be a lurker on a lot of social media platforms rather than a contributor. But in quizzing, actually lurking tends to help you because you keep grabbing those small bits of information. So it's changed me in a wide variety of ways that I've become more confident. It of course helps with stage presence a lot. I'm not afraid of getting onto a premise or a stage or a podium where I'm supposed to speak to a wide number of people, mostly because I have this inherent safety net, which I feel is that there are the slides behind me. So even if it's a marketing deck right now, I feel like it's a quiz that I'm running and it's just me telling them a story that they have to listen to.
All right. So now that we've name dropped some greats from quizzing, let's move on to what are your favorite questions that you've created? Do you have some to share with us?
Yeah, I do. Thankfully, Abhinav gave me enough for wanting to make a site of my own. So I did pull up some of my old questions.
Yes.
I'll share my screen. Yeah, so I'll take you through my mindset while framing each of these questions and the expectations that I had from the quizzers in the audience that I had intended these to. And this certainly feels a lot like Journey of a Joke. And of course, you guys are Rabish Matthew here in case. Right. So this is question number one. So this question was about this particular author's novel, and upon being researched in 2009, it opened up a certain analysis wherein academics at the University of Toronto deciphered that between the ages of 28 and 22, upon counting the different number of words and indefinite nouns and phrases used in each book, that there was a certain statistical significant drop in vocabulary and the increase in repeated phrases. And these are mostly associated with memory difficulties and disorders, something that the author had never been diagnosed of in their living existence. So, of course, the author is dead right now. So, the two parts to this question were, what did the study conclude? And which book, quite ironically, faced the most abrupt decline? Now, so this question actually defines and epitomizes the style that I spoke about previously. So I like to have the question wherein one part of the question involves a certain funda, wherein you work that out, and the other part of that question involves a proper noun, which allows you to get into that premise. And post the quiz, I hope that you will enter that universe that I've spoken about a lot more, because I included that in the question. So there's something for quizzers who believe in the concept of trivia in the terms of proper nouns being there in a quiz, and there's something for general quizzers who look at workability as well. So that split 50-50 split is what I absolutely look at while setting quizzes. So this in some ways gets to what I intend to. So the defining clues that I look to here, like if someone were to crack open the question, were to look at the fact that the quiz, what was that the author was active between the ages of 28 and 82, was prolific in number of books that they came out with. Uh, they had a lot of indefinite nouns and phrases used in each book, and the fact that the issue that was concluded was to do with memory difficulties and disorders. So again, most of my proper nouns tend to be famous names that you'd absolutely heard of. So I'd look at someone ascertaining the most famous authors in the last couple of centuries, trying to fine tune who that would be, and then trying to come up with the issues that that author might have faced. So do you guys want to attempt the question?
The first thing that came to my mind was Proust and remembrance of things past because of the memory thing.
Right.
I don't think that would account for 2 centuries.
Also,
Prithvi, do you have a guess?
no, I was saying like he wouldn't have written so many books, right? 28 to 82.
For sure.
Right.
Another guess that I had was Marquez and what's his book? I forgot. 1,000 Years of Solitude. 100 Years of Solitude. What am I saying? Sorry.
I was thinking.
No, not him. Yeah.
No.
Arthur Conan Doyle, probably because of like the individual Sherlock Holmes stories.
On the right track, but not quite. So I'll get into the answer. So this was about, sorry, my bad. This is about Agatha Christie actually suffering from dementia. So this is something that wasn't discovered during her lifetime, but a lot of analysis went to then. Of course, 28 to 82 because of the ton of books that she wrote, Miss Marple, Poirot, and General Crime Mystery wrote. And once you had that in place, elephants can remember being an absolute fit in the sense that it's an irony to the fact that she suffered from dementia.
Lovely.
What did you set this for? Which quiz?
I think this is for the Gen quiz at Ames Jodhpur that I hosted in 2019. All right. So this is a different question. This was set for a specific sports quiz. So this is about a North American Soccer League franchise whose roots trace back to 1974, and the fact that they were awarded an expansion franchise to the area that I'll speak about. So, like most MLS teams, their name originated from a lottery or from fans sending in suggestions. So, this name came from a newspaper contest in which fans were supposed to send in suggestions for the name of the franchise, which was chosen by the team's general manager, Dick Berg. But the final name that was chosen, Berg was very critical of the proximity of the San Andreas Fault to the franchise's general area of general location. So this is supposed to help you get to what the name of the NASL or now MLS franchisee is. The fact that it is very close to the San Andreas Fault is something that the manager was critical of, but they still went ahead with the name. Now, the second part of the question is that in an amazingly appropriate move, the US Geological Survey and its geophysicists actually set up a particular device in the team's offices at the stadium. This is not the first occurrence of such a device being set up, with 3 more being actually installed at Seattle's CenturyLink Field to monitor the shaking caused by Seahawks fans. So if you put focus to the word shaking caused by fans, in recent years there have been a lot of occurrences of Leicester City fans celebrating and there being certain eminences or occurrences because of this. So again, if you look to how I explained the first question, that 50-50 split is here in case as well. Here I'm trying to get you to identify a proper noun based off the clue that I've given you about the proximity to the San Andreas Fault. And I'm trying to also get you to work out a particular device which is relevant to certain shakings caused by fans across sports or the Seahawks in general. So if you guys want to take an attempt.
Yeah, I know this because I play a lot of FIFA and MLS.
Right.
Second part would be of the seismograph.
That's correct.
Okay, so Prithvi would know the first part. I'm sure you knew this, both the parts.
Yeah, should I go for it?
Yeah, go.
Is this San Jose earthquakes?
Yeah, the San Jose earthquakes are correct. So I liked that linkage between the San Jose earthquakes and the seismographs. So this is also something that I endeavored to try and get into my questions as much as possible, that the two parts are linked in themselves intricately or as much as possible. So again, you see that 50-50 split between a proper noun and a workable funda in the other half. Right. So this was for a sports quiz that I had hosted at IIT Bombay in 2018. Right, I'll go on to the next question. So this is a question that Abhinav has seen. So I will leave it to Prithvi to answer this. So this is about the singer called Eric Schrodi, who's known by his stage name Everlast, and he's dedicated the past 24 years of his life to music. He started out as a solo rapper, releasing his debut album, Forever Everlasting. So like you can see, I like giving that basic premise to people, at least a couple of lines about the person in case, so that when they go back, they can at least look up the person in that sense. So the real crux of the question, he wrote this song called 65 Roses, which speaks about the hardships that his wife and him went through trying to deal with something that his daughter was actually going through. So what is the absolute funda, or what is the reasoning behind him terming this song as 65 Roses? So I'll give you a little context as to where this quiz was held. So this question is from the Gen quiz at Ames Jodhpur. So because of doctors and medical students being the target audience here, this is something that I'm giving you as an extra context. and the fact that his daughter was going through some real life problems as well. So take the name of the song 65 Roses, try and say that aloud in your head, or just say that aloud a couple of times, and try to see what you can work out from the name of the song itself. So there was a lot of trauma that Eric and his wife were going through because they had to see something that their daughter was going through, and that fit in absolutely with him titling the song 65 Roses.
It's about some terminal illness that the daughter was facing, but I can't really place anything further than that.
Okay. Abhinav, do you remember the answer?
I think the name of the disease she was unable to say, and she called it 65 Roses, right?
Yeah, right there. I got the
I
answer.
don't remember the name of the disease.
So 65
fibrosis.
Children pronounce cystic fibrosis. So there's an absolute trend on social media as well, where people take 65 roses for cystic fibrosis as well. So in tribute of his daughter and other cystic fibrosis patients as well, he called the song 65 Roses.
This is amazing, man.
Perfect. Yeah, I love this question, and of course the setting was so well, so good for you to make put this question in.
Right. Go to the next one. This is from a Mela's quiz that I had hosted at IMNU, Pulses G. So a lot of my quizzes tend to feature written rounds revolving around puns and portmanteaus. I like making written rounds around them. This in some ways is inspired by my travels to Interbank, because a lot of quizzes that I'd attended there in terms of had a lot of fun-worthy written rounds, and of course major quizzes in general have that wordplay element involved a lot of that. So I in general enjoy them as well. So the question revolves around this book called Holy Tango Literature, which is a 2004 collection of absurdist poetry and drama in the style of various poets and playwrights written by this guy called Francis Heaney. So stubs in the work include poems and dramas like Toilets, Multicolored Argyle Sea, Likeable Wilma, An Email, Ellen, Siamese Twin. So what is the funda behind the titling of these stubs in particular? And how does the title, Holy Tango Literature itself, just the word Holy Tango, also allude to what is happening with these stubs? So it's completely workable on all ends of the question. There's something to do with Holy Tango. There's something to do with all the stubs that I mentioned. And the definitive clue in this question is the fact that it's absurdist poetry and drama in the styles of various poets and playwrights. So if you look closely at some of those names, some things should pop out.
I know this answer because I was part of this quiz.
Yeah.
I have no clue, so go ahead.
This is something that my teammate Sashwat cracked actually, because he's so good with word plays and obviously anagram, which this question is.
Yeah, fitting person to crack the question. So I'll go to the answer.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So the anagrams, the stubs are titled with the anagrams of the writer. So you'll see T.S. Eliot was Toilets, like a Siamese Twin was someone else. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was Multicolored Argyle Sea. And the entire title of the book itself, Holy Tango, Anagrams to an Anthology, which is what this book is as well. So the cover of the book actually sees you looking at anthology being scratched out in terms of Holy Tango, and the author also explaining how he anagrammed it there and such.
Nice.
Right. I'll go on to the next question. Right. This I think was for one of the my Canvas open quizzes that I'd had, and I just liked it because of how workable, at least I intended it to be. Operation Nez Rouge was started in 1984 in Quebec City by Jean-Marie Deconne, who had two goals. He wanted to finance the Université de Laval swimming team, and he also wanted to do something to fight driving under the influence. Every year during a particular period, the initiative comes into play, having been used these many number of times between 1984 and 2004. What does Nez Rouge literally translate to? When is it employed? And what does the service entail? So if you look closely at the words Nez Rouge and you try to work them around to commonplace English, a very direct translation should result. look at the fact that he wanted to fight against driving under the influence, and what period would be appropriate with that original translation that he got hold of, and trying to keep people safe while driving. So all of them are linked in a particular manner, which is why I tend to like this question a lot.
I remember again being a part of this quiz with Mayank this time. This was 2019, right? Early 2019.
Yeah, November 20. Yep.
November 20. Oh, then it was Kushan and not Mayank. Yeah, Prithvi, do you want to take a guess? I'm sure you know the two words, ne and rouge. Rouge is, of course, red.
No, go ahead.
With the fact that this is in Canada, probably be helpful. Winter country.
Right, I'll go to the answer.
Yeah.
So, Rouge literally translates to red nose. There are taxi escort service for people who are too drunk to drive home during. Of course, Operation Red Nose fits in well with the Christmas theme as well.
Yeah. I also like this question that day, for sure.
Did you win that quiz, Abhinav?
Yeah, we won that quiz. Because of Beach Wala round which Panda had, art question. So, pehle mein we were trailing by 20 points. Pehle round wise, clockwise. And nobody, as in, we, इतना मुश्किल था first half कि पहले 12 या 16 या 14 question में there was only one pounce we had and that was wrong. Literally there was one pounce across all teams. और सब wait कर रहे bounce के लिए, इतना मुश्किल था. और फिर बीच में एक art वाला question आया, round आया और वो हमने फोड़ दिया. उसके बाद से तो हम lead ही कर रहे थे, वरना हम 20 point पीछे थे. It was like 50 और 30 point था ऐसा और फिर उसमें lead करने लगे तो फिर जीत गए.
This is the original criticism that I spoke about when it comes to toning down quizzes or ascertaining who my audience is. I thought there'd be a lot.
That quiz was slightly because you were not the only quiz master, right?
Yeah, that also resulted in that. True.
Yeah. So you had to kind of take care of that thing.
True.
So now that we've discussed about Quizmasters quizzes, I'd like to take a comment on the current scenario of quizzing. What do you like about quizzing and what do you dislike about the current scene?
Okay. In the absolute current sense of what's happening, I'm not a big fan of digital quizzing at all. Despite my few ventures at a couple of Discord and Zoom quizzes, I really miss the real life experience of having questions passed through and having that real life experience. So that's just in terms of what's going on right now. Taking a broader picture of the circuit as whole. So now you can see there's a clear divide between how quizzers are perceived, how quizzing is perceived, and how quizzing really is in the country right now. So because of franchisee quizzes like Tata Crucible and other certain ventures, there's a clear definitive edge to how, not an edge, but development to how quizzers are developing across the country in a way that a lot of that is accelerated by their exposure to certain stuff like biz quizzes only and not as much as proper gen quizzing like purists would call it. So that divide again itself, like the divide was originally in information asymmetry caused by a lack of access, a lack of equal access between everyone. Like previously in the 80s, people used to cite questions from books and not everyone had access to them. And that got balanced in the mid 2010s by the access of cheap internet to everyone. So everyone had access to the same amount of information. But that divide again is being created in terms of how quizzing is perceived in those two different zones. There's one classical form of quizzing where it's serious, intense, and people team up with their own premises and participate. There's the development of tier 2 quizzing in India, which is propagated by subcultures. Then of recent and of late, there's a different drive of casual quizzing propagated by entities like India Wants to Know, who are trying to promote quizzing as more as an informational edutainment activity more than anything else, which again is bringing a lot more people into the fold. So there of course comes in the topic and debate of gatekeeping in certain premises and how quiz clubs across cities should look to open up to more people while also retaining the premise of how quizzing could be. So there's a lot of clutter right now, and I'm not sure of how people are processing all of this, because sometimes I'm divided. Like sometimes I want to set or look at an accessible quiz that everyone has access to, but sometimes I also want to look at a hardcore quiz that purists or people who are absolutely intensely into quizzing are looking at. So I'm not being able to put my feet across either of those two boards. I like being a part of both of those spectrums. So the development of this is something that I'm looking to very closely. So when I went to MICA in 2018, um, I was looking at the Ahmedabad Quizzing Club and the quizzing circuit there as a way for me to get my quizzing fix in general by me participating. And of course, when you come up with someone like Abhinav, you're always playing for second place. But internally at MICA, I was looking at developing the quizzing culture there, trying to get more non-quizzers into the fold, people who've typically not been exposed into quizzing as such. So I tried to put a lot more initiative and effort into that. I'm not sure of how much I succeeded, but I did try. So again, two very different boards, two very different premises, two very different scenarios. I enjoy both of them, but I'm not sure that there's a middle ground yet. And that middle ground is what I'm looking for in terms of developing in the next few years. Hopefully, someone comes up with a premise which entertains and interests all of the people across those two divides that I spoke about.
Right.
So, what do you like about quizzing also?
So, um, to bring it down, that primal sense of having, like a lot of people have written about this and spoken about this. There's a famous graphic created by Mayank Majumdar for Soapy Grey Matter, and there's something that Mr. Tejasvi Udupa had written about us being mice in an experiment in majors quizzes, which I will link you guys to. All of those keep reiterating the same premise, which is why quizzing is exciting, which is why it's interesting to me, is to me unlocking or unlatching that last bit of hold which does not permit me from entering the question in a whole. So there are a few strands of information which are broken across the question, and I can comprehend a few of them because of my previous experiences, my previous introduction to some form of media, or just general day-to-life exposure. And the way that all of those combine together to sort of unlock the answer in my head, that feeling is still unbeatable, and that rush of adrenaline that comes through every time that happens is still unbeatable. That's something that's never going to be replaced. So even if quizzing becomes completely virtual in the coming days, or there's a premise where Discord quizzing becomes the new normal, that premise will never change. It'll never change for me in the sense that I enjoy unlocking and cracking questions as a whole. So that keeps me interested. What's changed for me, and this will again answer back to my school quizzing to college quizzing journey, is the fact that as growing up in my childhood, because of how my childhood was, I was primarily hooked to the written medium. I was a voracious reader and stuck specifically to books and didn't have exposure to visual medium as such. But moving into college, as it happens with most college quizzes in general, and moving to open quizzes as well, the exposure to audiovisual nature of objects and looking at more movies, media, film, music, that has changed, of course, how I approach stuff as well. And the ability to process information has also changed. Now, this is a double-edged sword because reading becomes distracting of late. Even though you're hooked by a long read, trying to get through a book or a piece of information that does not interest you is difficult. And that in general has changed for most people, and in particular for me. So quizzing will also have these necessary shifts in place. So I'm waiting to see what that next shift is. Where do we move from the audiovisual medium? What's next? So that's also something I'm looking at.
I think you talked about the fact that you are not very, not liking the online quizzes very much, which is
Right.
the same case with me. You need to get your fix from time to time, and you kind of have to get used to it, right? Which is something which is, as in, to me, which is why I continue for a few quizzes at least. I try to enter. But generally, how do you think quizzing has changed you? I think, as in, had it not been for quizzing, you could have been a different person, right? And as we talked about, you are entering into your corporate life now. So how do you think aspects of quizzing would help you in your career?
Right. What was the first question? My bad. Sorry.
So the first question was, how has quizzing changed you?
Yeah,
as a
right.
person?
I went too deep into the rabbit hole thinking. Yeah. So how has quizzing changed me? So to answer this question, I typically answer with what I tell most people about how should one get into quizzing. So a lot of people, particularly not aware of how quizzing in India works, they believe that a lot of quizzing, and as is typical, and I'm sure it's been reiterated multiple times, is about mugging up a certain amount of information and then regurgitating it in a quiz again. But what I like to tell people is that quizzing is just an outlet for how I process or receive that said information. That outlet, if it were not present, if I didn't quiz, I'm actually hard to put at as to what would lead me to that fix again. I don't think there's a replacement for it yet, because as is typical, most people, like, that outlet for them tends to be something like blogging or writing or coming up with videos, for example, just like this one. I don't think I have an absolute replacement for what quizzing is, which is a big problem, because at times where I don't have the time and the energy to invest into quizzing because it requires a certain degree of time and investment, I'm not sure of what to do, because I tend to be a lurker on a lot of social media platforms rather than a contributor. But in quizzing, actually lurking tends to help you because you keep grabbing those small bits of information. So it's changed me in a wide variety of ways that I've become more confident. It of course helps with stage presence a lot. I'm not afraid of getting on to a premise or a stage or a podium where I'm supposed to speak to a wide number of people, mostly because I have this inherent safety net, which I feel is that there are the slides behind me. So even if it's a marketing deck right now, I feel like it's a quiz that I'm running, and it's just me telling them a story that they have to listen to.
Yeah, you have basically done your research, which is why the confidence comes in, right? So that will
Right,
help you.
right. And what was the second part of the question that I was supposed to answer?
Basically, what aspects of quizzing will help you in your career?
Will
Yeah.
help me, right. So I graduated from MICA with a degree in marketing and communication, and I'm going to get into product marketing in the near future. So quizzing in itself gets you into the nitty gritties of every topic, and in some ways, despite there being disparaged for the phrase, it allows you to be this jack of trades. So I particularly pride myself on being a jack of trades across a wide variety of topics. I don't think I have a core strength in any particular medium, but I have a certain amount of reach in a lot of topics that I like to dabble in. So this in case also helps with marketing in today's age, where you have to be adaptable and you need to be open to learning across a wide variety of mediums, be it digital marketing, social media, offline, whatever it may be. So that inherent sense of doing your bit of research, of trying to be adaptable to new methods and platforms, of exposing yourself to new forms of media is something that quizzing is inherently helping me, and it already is.
All right. So interestingly enough, Panda's answer reminded me of something Abhishek Kapoor once told me. So he said that at the root of it, why we like quizzing is it's an ego boost. For 5 seconds, you're the smartest person in a room, and that's why it doesn't matter how many spectators or audience is there. As long as your competitors are really good,
I
you
think
just
it
feel the
lasts
smarter
for
than.
more than 5 seconds for him.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very well put thought out by Kapoor there.
Yeah. All right. With that, yes, Panda, you're saying something.
No, I was just going to say that what Kapoor said could be taken on in a little more sense, in that ego boost is what keeps quizzing running itself. No one acknowledges it publicly,
Yeah.
but you being validated as a quizzer or a quizmaster is what keeps you quizzing. Otherwise, there's not much intrinsic motivation for someone to do this of their own accord unless they're absolutely into it, which is why you'll see a lot of people tend to drop off across certain eras where they might have been active. So I'm not sure if monetary motivation can ever be a formal replacement for this, but that inherent feeling of yes, you're right about something, and not being able to be sure of whether you were right 5 seconds ago is what truly drives quizzing for sure. He's absolutely right.
I think that's also why a lot of us stuck, because in the initial days, we could answer maybe 3 or 4 questions at best. But
Right.
it was just that one moment that made you feel special in that quiz, that made us like strive for being a better quizzer.
Right.
All right. I guess we're done with the questions. Abhinav, do we have more?
No, nothing from my side.
Okay. Thanks for this, Panda.
Ciao.
And
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Panda. Yeah.